Hello, everyone. I'm sure some of you are still joining us, but I thought I'd send out my welcome and hello before you think that there's nobody here waiting for you, because we're all very anxious to get started on this exciting webinar tonight. So I'm going to give it about 2 minutes, and then I'll jump in with our welcoming message. So just if you want to get yourself comfortable and get your drink of water and get yourself ready for a really exciting webinar coming up. Okay, I think I'll begin because I see there's a lot of you here already, so I don't want you thinking that we're wasting your time. So welcome, everyone. I want to start off first by saying welcome to our Loose Parts webinar. It is the last in our series of 3 webinars that we've done this fall with CNAC. But before I get into the housekeeping matters and the webinar itself, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the land on which the CCCF is located. It's the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. We respect the treaties that were made on all territories and acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past, and dedicate ourselves to move forward in partnership with Indigenous communities in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. So I want to start by saying that first. And again, welcome on behalf of the Canadian Child Care Federation and the Child and Nature Alliance of Canada for this third, as I said, a third in our series of 3 webinars on outdoor play, which we went to you, all of our members and beyond, to ask what you wanted to know about outdoor play, because we had a lot of feedback that people were interested in getting a deeper dive in some webinars talking about outdoor play, but huge field, as you know, and a huge topic. So we did sum it down to the 3 that we've done here. And this one, Loose Parts, is the last one we're doing for the year. And of course, January is a new year, so who knows what's coming next. But anyway, so let me think. Housekeeping matters. I do want to mention a few things. There will be certificates, as you know, for watching this live webinar. And there'll also be a resource list that will be sent out with the certificates. And that will be done by the end of this week. So give us a couple of days to turn that around, because they aren't auto-generated. We actually do those ourselves. So that will be happening by Friday. And if you have questions during the webinar, feel free to ask. I know that our great host will be probing you for questions and answers and participating. And you can do that on the side. There's a chat bar on the right-hand side you'll see, and feel free to post questions in there and say hello and tell us where you're from, and you start off that way too. So I think that's about it for me, and I won't waste any more time here, but I want to turn it over to Kay and Sinead, and they're going to introduce themselves, so I'm not going to take up any more airtime with that. But welcome, Kay and Sinead, and thanks so much for joining us tonight for this webinar on loose parts.
Thank you. I'll go back. Hello, everyone. My name is Sinead, and I am joining you tonight from Toronto, colonially known as Toronto. I was born and raised in Takaronto near the East Don River in the East Don River Parklands, and I've been an early childhood educator for just about 20 years now. And I've worked as a forest school practitioner, and I'm a facilitator with the Child and Nature Alliance of Canada, and a lot of work. I've been involved in a lot of work and research and consultation and facilitation for critical pedagogies of place in early childhood education, and also a mother of a preschooler right now.
Okay, bonjour. Wabshke benesi and dishnakaz tiktoram wabanaki onjiba risugush onjiba wajushkinigam onjiba. Hi, my English name is Kay Rasmussen, and this evening I am coming to you live from my basement in Treaty 3 unceded territory, also known as Kenora. And I am a mixed-race woman of Wabanaki. I've been a land-based educator for 10 years. My life's work has taken me on a path to help connect children to the land as a means of resurgence and preservation of culture and language. I am a professor of ECE at Manadoo Bawatig Seven Generations Education Institute. I am a Forest and Nature School practitioner facilitator with CNAC, the director of Boreal Forest School here in Kenora, Ontario. And I'm a mother of 3 awesome kids, 18 years old, 9 and 7, and they keep me really busy. So I'm excited to be here with all of you this evening.
So I thought we would go back to just a flow of what we're going to be getting into today, what we're going to delve into. We're going to share a little bit about loose parts and explore what are loose parts and what types of loose parts are out there. And then we're going to delve a little bit into the prefrontal context and how that links with 21st century learning and loose parts. We'll talk about risky play and how the role of the educator fits in with all these elements. And so at the end of our webinar, we'll open it up to questions and answers, but we will be posing questions throughout the presentation too. So I'm going to skip forward now to our first question. Oh, no, that's Kay's turn.
Okay, well, we thought we'd start the presentation with a bit of a loose parts story, because I really love storytelling, and it's wonderful to just hear stories about loose parts in action. So these photos here up on your screen, this was an inquiry that came from one of my 4-year-old students at Forest and Nature School. And the student asked me, how many rocks are here in the forest? And, I paused and thought, I don't even know. So from that question, we set out to find an answer. And we spent hours looking for, gathering, and organizing rocks. So the question that this student posed really grew into a pro-social and collaborative experience that involved many of the students in our school. So in this loose parts experience, because the rocks were the loose parts that were, all around us, just naturally there, I was able to scaffold the child's question, of their inquiry-based question, and turn a familiar schema, such as positioning, connecting, and transporting. We had to transport these rocks, and then the children positioned them into, they called it a rock train, and they were connecting rocks, trying to make patterns with big and smaller and different shapes. And, it became a math experience and also a play-based experience. And then we went on to actually count all of the rocks in the rock train, and we grouped them by tens. And so the children were learning about grouping by tens with all of these loose parts. And, it was a really fun, physically active, loose parts experience where we were integrating math and existing play-based schemas all in one. So I just like sharing that story because I think it really portrays, the potential of loose parts in nature, and how we can take seemingly simple random pieces that are around us like rocks, and we can turn it into an integrated collaborative learning experience.
So thanks for sharing that story, Kay. I love hearing that story. So the question, I'm going to actually pose it to all of you and invite you to, just with one word, what do you think loose parts are? What would be one word that you could use to describe loose parts? And just to fire away onto the chat of what you think. How would you describe loose parts? Any suggestions for? Well, maybe what I'll do is offer a bit of a little task. What has often come up in, well, I'll just start with this. So if you could find something around you, pick anything at all, take any object, one object, and just take a moment and sit back and just watch how many innovations that object can come up with on their own. And for this example that I presented on the screen, there's a bowl. So we can sit and watch the bowl, or we can sit and watch an object you might have found around you and see what it does. So when I came across this blogger, Mark Armitage, he was challenging the notion that loose parts are in and of themselves open-ended. And we hear about this all the time when it comes to what loose parts are. But the idea is that on its own, an object doesn't do anything at all. And so instead the question becomes, how do you use this object? And part of what this little exploration is thinking about, in all of the objects that are around us, they all can be loose parts, but the dynamic piece to it is when children have an opportunity to interact with it, and showing that that's how we link loose parts with children's play. So sharing this quote by Maria Montessori: "The senses, being the explorers of the world, open the way to knowledge." With loose parts, as I mentioned before, there's an interdependency happening with loose parts. There's so many variables involved when it comes to the types of materials that might be available to children and the potential for the play that comes from it. And when we offer loose parts to children, we're really making the potential limitless. There's a number of different theorists who talk about affordances and the assemblage of loose parts and the agency of loose parts. Gibson talked about how our perception influences how we would interact on any given object. And so that each object, whether it's a stone or it's a log or it's a plastic tube, they all have unique values that are unique to the person that's perceiving them. And so it kind of opens up to the idea that when we talk about the open-endedness of loose parts, it's happening because of the way children are interacting with them. I came across a really fascinating idea around how rocks or stones or sticks have the agency of them in and of themselves. So we often think about a stone as being a static object, but someone named Rocio described how when we're carrying stones, our bodies actually become, we actually weigh more. Like we literally weigh more when we're carrying stones with us. If we're holding a cold stone in our hand, then our body starts to change in reaction to that. So our hands might start to send more blood flow to our hands because our hands are starting to get colder. And so, you know, just having a cold stone in our hand can accelerate the blood flow to our body. So part of what's so fascinating when you think about the range of loose parts out there is that encounters with materials, both loose part materials, can produce so many, such a diverse range of possibilities. Back in the 70s, there was someone named Simon Nicholson who identified something called a theory of loose parts, but he was actually inspired by the discovery method of education that was emerging in the 60s. And so Nicholson is often referred to when thinking about loose parts, and he described that a loose part is anything that can be manipulated, transported, manipulated, and combined. And that in any environment, both the degree of inventiveness and creativity and the possibility of discovery are directly proportional to the number of kind of variables in it. That sounds like a bit of a math equation when I'm describing that out loud. So Nicholson is someone who's often referenced when thinking about loose parts and where the terminology of loose parts came from. So in some of my preparation for this presentation and this webinar, I was really surprised to come across something that existed in Toronto, even when I was young here in Toronto in the early 70s and 80s, late 70s, early 80s. And that is, loose parts really informed adventure playgrounds. There was someone back in a Danish landscape architect, was curious about why none of the children were actually playing with the playgrounds that he was building. And so he was inspired to develop what he called junk playgrounds, and what we now know also as adventure playgrounds and pop-up playgrounds. And so I'll just share this little clip from something in Toronto, from an adventure playground that existed in Toronto not so long ago, or more long ago, depending.
Mud. Glorious mud. Harborfront's creative and adventure playgrounds were designed with kids and play in mind. All you need is imagination and energy. And of course, what goes up must come down. In the adventure playground, adults aren't even allowed. With saws and hammers and lots of junk, children are free to build their own world.
So I will, so any, what I'd like to share is that this was something that had actually existed for children, but the changes that have happened in our society around, I think with this particular playground, there's a limit of funding that was available, and then the concern for litigation and harm was becoming more prominent, and it's really changed how we see children's play happening today. So just a little bit of a overview of different types of loose parts. The types of loose parts are pretty endless, and usually they're either natural materials such as rocks and sticks, logs and sand, but then there's also manufactured, recycled, or upcycled materials such as pots and pans, sheets and crates and clothespins, tubes, cardboard tubes, plastic tubes, wooden pallets, planks, nails. And so the types of loose parts that can be made available to often depend on what's happening on the land around you during different seasons. And also, we often don't think about this, but Nicholson also described elements and as part of loose parts as well. So like thinking of water as loose parts, or the wind, and how do children combine wind with ramps, let's say, or sheets. And then, but there's also how are children using gravity and magnetism as well in their play with loose parts. But most often, when children have the opportunity to play with loose parts, there's often a combination of manufactured materials and found in natural materials. These images are from some of the work that I've done as a forest school practitioner, and also my work as an early child educator in the preschool program. And milk crates. Gosh, I wonder sometimes where do all the milk crates come from? Because I feel like so many programs use them, and they can be used for storage. They can be used to build, ice blocks or snow blocks, yeah, they've just been really helpful for a lot of the programs that I've been involved in. But also, I know of lots of programs reference milk crates too. So just a little bit of a link between play and loose parts. When children have the opportunity to use loose parts and in the outdoors, a key thing for play is that that play should be free from adult interference and micromanagement. Sometimes when we think about loose parts and we see images of loose parts set up for programming, often it is still an adult who gets to decide on what materials are even put out. With play and loose parts, play should be freely chosen by the child or children, that it's intrinsically motivated, process-oriented, fun and enjoyable, not literal and non-linear, and a dynamic, like active and dynamic with interaction with objects, ideas, humans and non-humans. I was curious about how people feel about this image too, if that's something that you feel comfortable with. Like where's your comfort level at when you look at this photo? Anybody want to share in the chat? How does that make you feel when you see that image? So one of the predominant aspects of loose part play is that it just looks really messy, and that's something that that a lot of adults can be uncomfortable with too, and want to manage in some way as well. So just a little overview of the value of loose parts. There's, I think, if you value play and if you value what we know children need to support their health and well-being and their growth, and their meaning making in the world, then we see loose parts can be linked with all aspects of learning and life. So it includes language and literacy and communication, critical thinking skills, imagination, creativity, problem solving. I mean, I experimenting. I feel like this is really just a little capture of what all the possibilities of learning that takes place when children get to explore loose parts.
Okay, thanks, Sinead. I'm going to lead us into a bit of information about the prefrontal cortex. So I feel like I should let everyone know that I am not a brain scientist, or my background is not in neuroscientists. I am an ECE who, like many of you, has probably studied early childhood brain development. And I've become really fascinated with this part of our brain called the prefrontal cortex. Now, the reason I've become so interested in it is because of my work outside with children and watching them try and solve problems, navigate conflicts, whether that conflict is with a peer or possibly with the land itself. Like it's raining all day and a child is cold and they're tired, and how do we problem solve or navigate those conflicts or issues that come up in our life. So it led me down this path of thinking about the prefrontal cortex. So for those of you who aren't familiar with this part of the brain, it really is, it's important for the development of the prefrontal cortex to happen in early childhood, because our paths towards becoming, well-adjusted adults is really formed in this part of our brain. So the prefrontal cortex goes through rapid development in early childhood, and it's fully developed by the age of 4. And then after age 4, it starts to refine itself and refine its functionings. So its primary functions, or it's primarily responsible for our ability to set goals, to make assessments of what's happening or predictions or a hypothesis, for example. It allows us to focus our attention on things that are going on around us. It helps us navigate social behaviors and develop pro-social skills. So there is a lot going on in this one small area of the brain. And so much of these skills, like predicting what's going to happen next, learning how to behave socially with our peers, how to, read a situation. These are really vital skills to learn in our early years. And if you've spent time observing children play, you'll realize that the majority of learning that's happening within those 0 to 7 years is about these functionings of the prefrontal cortex, which are called our executive brain functions. So we have 4 executive brain functions that I'm going to focus on that come from the prefrontal cortex. And what executive brain functions are is essentially they help us develop the skills we need to be successful every day. Our ability to recall memories, like when I was 3 years old, I have a memory of putting my hand on the wood stove, and I've never put my hand on a wood stove again. So we store memories in our prefrontal cortex to, make sure we don't make the same mistakes, or to help us formulate better ideas or strategies as we grow up. Our ability to take directions, to regulate our emotions, to think flexibly, so divergently, about the possibility of an object or a material, are all part of our executive brain functions, and they're all created in our prefrontal cortex. So how does all of this connect to loose parts and playing outside? Well, they are directly connected, and that's what really sparked my interest and my enthusiasm for the prefrontal cortex. So I'm going to focus first on our cognitive behavior. The prefrontal cortex, what it does is it helps us focus our thoughts and our attention on a specific task. So when children are provided with a variety of open-ended materials or loose parts, and given the time to explore and create with those loose parts, they're able to learn what it is like to be calm and focused, which isn't necessarily something that happens regularly within early year centers or kindergarten programs where there are lots of children and people in one space. So when children are using loose parts, either indoors or outdoors, they're able to, focus in those focusing skills from the prefrontal cortex and find that calm, alert, and focused place where they can start engaging with materials in a meaningful way. So what does this meaningful way look like? Well, from my experience and my observations in my 10 years of practice, it's been primarily focused around STEM curriculum. So our science, technology, engineering, and math, When children are presented with loose parts and they're given the freedom and the space to use those parts whichever way they'd like, I have typically seen more engineering of structures, more creations of patterns, the discovering of how elements work together or fit together, and learning about how new tools or technologies can support learning. And this is all enriching, our executive brain functions when we provide those loose parts. So then we'll move on to personality expression. And what I've seen in my practice is that when children are presented with loose parts, they're given the opportunity to truly express themselves and the parts of their personality through their play with these open-ended materials. So without the outside influence of predetermined materials, or what we would call like close-ended materials, children can express their inner creativity or their understanding of the world through open-ended play with these loose parts. I've seen children create small worlds with little sticks and leaves and pine cones and acorns, and they're creating characters and plots and conflicts, and they're acting out what's happening in their daily lives. I've actually, most recently, I saw children acting out the Trump versus Biden election results with loose parts in the forest as they're trying to process, what's happening in the world. I'm hearing all about this election, and then they're able to, play out their understanding of this election with little sticks and pine cones. Then we have decision making. Children don't get to make enough decisions. And the reason I love being an outdoor educator is because children are challenged daily to make decisions. I shouldn't step there. I might trip. I shouldn't, get soaking wet right now, or I might get cold later. They're constantly making autonomous decisions about their bodies, about what they're interested in, and about what they want to, play with or focus their attention on that day. So in the prefrontal cortex, this is the place where we learn to make decisions. So if children are never given the opportunity in those early years when the prefrontal cortex is rapidly developing, if they're not given the opportunity to make decisions during that time about their own autonomy or about what they're interested in, they don't learn how to, or it takes longer for them to learn how to do it. So we recall information about what has worked in the past or what hasn't worked. And then from recalling those memories, we're able to formulate reasonable and logical solutions to problems that we're faced with. So when playing with loose parts, children are given the opportunity to make endless decisions. It's so fun. One pine cone can become a character in a story, or the pine cone can become the magical jewel, or the pine cone becomes, an ancient stone that we need to deliver across the forest to our friends who need to heal some baby rabbits. Like, it's endless, the possibilities and the decisions that the children get to make when we give them materials that are open-ended. And thus really promotes the autonomy of decision making. So the next executive brain function that I'm going to just briefly chat about tonight is social behavior. Now, experiences in early childhood directly impact the development of our prefrontal cortex. Our social behaviors are formed within early childhood, and playing with loose parts allows children to engage in more open social relationships with their peers. In my Forest and Nature School program, we don't have any close-ended toys. We don't have any toys at all. We have buckets and shovels and materials or tools that children can work with, but they make their own toys or their own representation of toys out of loose parts that they find in nature. And when children are able to make their own toy out of a stick or pine cone, it creates more divergent invitations for children to engage with each other in more meaningful play. So loose parts as a medium allows for long-term projects. And when children engage in long-term projects, they're engaging in more social behaviors and they're learning pro-social skills that build over time. All right, I have a video for you and I would like us to watch the video. It's 1.5 minutes long. And we've just talked about, you know, some functions of the prefrontal cortex and these executive brain functions. And when you're watching the video, I'd love it if some of you could just throw in the chat box what executive functionings you're seeing in action when children are exploring the different materials, when they're setting them up. Are you seeing patterns? Are you seeing social behavior? Are you seeing artistic expression or expression of self? Please feel free to throw your observations in the chat. And we know as ECEs and kindergarten teachers that, you know, observing is it's how we form our curriculum. It's how it informs our pedagogy so deeply. So this is just an opportunity for you to do a small observation and kind of put what we just chatted about in action. So there's going to be a little delay when I pull up the video and then pull up the PowerPoint again. So please just be patient as we get going here. All right. Okay, so I saw quite a bit going on in that video. I'm just going to sneak over to the chat. That's open-ended, hands held, anything. Wow, thank you so much for contributing to the chat and, you know, for your observations. And what I saw happening was there was, you know, that social behavior of these two children were playing and laughing with the materials. They were making decisions. The little boy, he went over to the wall of materials and he was examining them and looking through them. So he was making decisions about what he felt would inform his play and what he wanted to play with. And then this personality expression through creative expression when they were making patterns and designs. And then our cognitive behavior. So the patterns, the classifying, the sorting, all of that is happening as the children engage with those loose parts. Now this was inside, but this is can easily be taken outdoors, either with materials you bring outside that are loose parts like bottle caps or marbles or glass gems, but it can also just take place with natural materials that you find out in nature. Now, how does all of this connect to 21st century learning? Being from Ontario, I know that there's a push for 21st century learning. This is really our inquiry-based learning in early childhood, as well as the kindergarten program and beyond. Now, 21st century learning connects really well with loose parts theory and outdoor learning. So I just wanted to highlight a few pieces of the 21st century learning that I find connect well with the development of the prefrontal cortex, as well as the theory of loose parts. So 21st century learning is an educational approach that's responding to the societal shifts about future careers that may not exist anymore, or exist in the future. So I've often talked with other ECEs that I teach in the ECE program about the technologies that we're handing kindergarten children or preschool children right now may be null and void by the time they're our age. And, you know, people like Steve Jobs, who invented the iPad or the iPhone, they didn't play with an iPad because they were the one who invented it. So the future that our children are going to grow up in is a fast-paced, innovative world that is connected to technologies. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean we need to plug kids in and make sure they know how to use technology before they're 7, because those technologies will be null and void by the time they're 30. Or maybe not completely null and void, but they'll have changed so rapidly that they won't have as much meaning in their lives. So instead, we need to focus on creativity, problem solving, innovation, risk assessments and risk-taking skills, relationship building and communication skills in order to set our children up for the dynamic abilities they're going to need to, navigate a different world when they're older that changes so rapidly. I never thought in 100 years that my kids would know how to get on a Zoom call and talk to their friends and connect and build relationships online, at age 7. But it's a different world that we live in. And 21st century learning helps us to focus more on innovation and critical thinking, which moves away from those more traditional practices we've seen in the past in early childhood, which have been a lot more theme-based. So Loris Malaguzzi, big fan, love the Reggio Emilia approach, but I found this quote by Loris and I thought it was really fitting for this presentation. So the wider the range of possibility we offer children, the more intense will be their motivations and the richer their experiences. So the power of open-ended materials is vast. Loose Parts promotes the foundation of 21st century learning by supporting children and their potential for creativity, innovation, imagination, critical thinking, and problem solving. All of those executive functions up in the prefrontal cortex are being supported by this inquiry-based emergent approach within the 21st century learning competencies that supports like those executive functions. So loose parts support a process of learning that is not closed. It's about the process opposed to the outcome, which you've probably heard many times. But the possibility for divergent ideas and solutions increases as we provide students with meaningful open-ended materials. And we encourage their engagement with those materials and the inquiry-based questions that they're going to pose. Loose parts is a way that we can meet 21st century learning competencies, which is the way most educational authorities and early years regulators are moving towards. I know I teach the early childhood education diploma program in Ontario, and the movement is towards inquiry-based, emergent, and 21st century learning competencies. So Loose Parts really supports our movement towards that type of pedagogical approach. Okay, Learning in action. Here we have two images side by side. Both of these images are of a pirate ship. Now, the image on the left meets most provincial playground guidelines for play spaces, but it also costs a lot of money if you've ever, done any fundraising for a playground. It looks like a lot of fun, but the opportunity for play is very limited. It's limited to what the children see. This type of play space doesn't support divergent thinking or the foundations of 21st century learning. So the image on the right is at Boreal Forest School, my school here in Northwestern Ontario, and it cost me $30. And it offers children, endless play opportunities because the play space is being created daily by the children, loose parts and tools, and they've created their own, pirate ship or boat. And the play changes every day. And when the play changes, their use of the loose parts and their creations change. So their interactions with materials will change as well, depending on the weather when they're outside. When it's snowing, we don't often, work on building the pirate ship as much, but we will pack it with snow. The children get to dive into 21st century learning through exercising their prefrontal cortex as they plan, communicate, problem solve, negotiate conflicts with each other about, where the mast for the pirate ship should go. And they get to use their imagination when they are using this play space on the left or on the right. So loose parts provide rich and engaging play opportunities. However, there is one striking difference between these two pictures, which maybe you've already picked up on, and it makes you feel a little uneasy. But one of these photos offers a lot more risk. So, there's children with tools, there could be nails sticking out of these boards, there's ropes, it does not look ministry approved at all, but it's a lot of fun. So children are using risky play in this photo. And we know that risk is essential for the development of our prefrontal cortex. Risky play supports brain development, and loose parts supports risky play. It's this beautiful integrated kind of web or cyclical notion of learning where loose parts supports risk supports prefrontal cortex, prefrontal cortex supports loose part play. It all fits together. So I have a bit of a video that I want to show, just a few minutes of a parent group and their children and how they moved away from using playgrounds and started using loose parts for their outdoor play and just the changes they saw in their schools and their students. Okay, so we will provide a link to that video if you'd like to see the entire video at the end of the presentation. But I wanted to stop there because she brings up risk. And that brings us into the next part of our presentation about, how our prefrontal cortex, loose parts play all connects to risk.
Okay. So I get to delve in with you guys about what is risky play. And Ellen Sandsetter's a researcher. She's done a lot of research into children's play, and the Child and Nature Alliance of Canada have integrated a lot of her work into our workshops. And the key message from what is risky play, it's thrilling and exciting play where children engage with the possibility and probability of danger. And from the perspective and voice of the child, risky play feels scary funny. Even from the video that we were just watching, you could hear some of the children, say themselves, oh, this feels a bit scary. And there's a part of risky play that there's sort of a spectrum of where we experience fear, this spectrum of exhilaration and fear. And when children are given opportunities to explore in risky play, they can navigate for themselves where they fit themselves. So if something is too scary, if we're in a situation where we feel too scared, we will start to shut down. We might, that fight or flight response might step in. Otherwise, something might be feeling exhilarating, and it's still a bit of fear, but there's a thrill and a sense of perhaps challenging or challenging oneself to explore that a bit further, whatever that might be. A guiding principle with risky play is a real genuine acceptance and sort of value that children are inherently competent, curious, and capable. And I think that's something that often surprises people. So even when we think back to that video, the children were engaging things that, the questions were posed ahead of time, but what if the child does this, or what if this happens? And then, the other question becomes, well, what if we didn't? What if all those children ended up not doing it at all? So something we incorporate into forest and nature school work is doing things like a risk-benefit assessment. So is the risk, when you weigh out the risks of what could happen versus the risks of versus the benefits of what the children are gaining, then that should help educators and parents decide on whether or not risky play is something that they want to incorporate. And just through all the research, we know that risky play just supports children's well-being, their mental health, their physical health in so many ways that it becomes a question of why are we depriving children from these opportunities. So I thought just I'd share a little song with you guys, and if you want to stand up and join me, because I'm going to stand up now and do some actions to show you guys this little song. I learned it from a fellow facilitator, Rebecca Seiling. We did a risky play workshop together, and I'll just sing it, and you can join in as you feel so inclined. So it's just a way to allow children to check in with themselves before engaging in outdoor play. And I should note too that outdoor play in and of itself is often considered to be risky because it's the outdoors. But anyway, let's try this out. So run, jump, climb, play, run, jump, climb, play. I look at my hands, I look at my feet, I take a deep breath, and I care for me. I look at my hands, I look at my feet, I take a deep breath, and I care for me. Run, jump, climb, play, run, jump, climb, play. So there we go. Just a little piece to share with you and get us moving a little bit. We are, that's the trickiest thing I think for this webinar is so much of our work is in the outdoors and interacting with people, but we know that's something that we're moving through as educators all together. So I'd like to share with you some Ellen Sandsetter has described 6 categories of risky play. And so we're going to, Kay and I will just share some examples of this with you.
Thanks, Sinead. I liked getting up and jumping around, so that was great. So the types of risky play in my forest and nature school practice and many forest and nature school practices across Canada, we embrace risky play as part of our pedagogy and as part of our, promoting brain development. And as we look at these photos here, these were 2 students in my forest and nature school program, ages 6 and 7 years old. And they're engaging in rough and tumble play. So instead of stepping in, what I did was I just stood back and I, started documenting and just watching. Because I find as ECEs, as teachers, we want to step in quickly when we see students start, roughhousing or having their hands on each other. And what these two students did was they created swords out of sticks. They actually whittled their own swords with knives, and then they went to battle. And so there was this element of like roughness. And they were tumbling around the forest and running after each other. But as you watched, you saw that their prefrontal cortex in action. So executive brain functionings were happening, where the children were respecting their space around each other. They weren't using the sticks to physically harm each other, but it was part of the play. It wasn't mean or spiteful. So rough and tumble play supports children in anticipating what's going to come next. And it helps them to develop pro-social skills as they navigate dramatic play with their peers. So in my practice, we encourage our students to be safe, to talk about what feels good for their body, to make decisions and have autonomy. And that part of that development is getting bumps and bruises and scrapes and, maybe getting an elbow from a peer, and then they have to talk about that conflict together and how someone got hurt and how can you care for one another. So rough and tumble play supports the development of the prefrontal cortex as children, anticipate events and control their emotions. And loose parts enriches this so much. So sand or water, if you've ever seen children play with sand or water, they immediately will just want to kind of get rough with it. They'll want to throw it around. They want to dig in it. They want to alter it. They want to change it. They want to roll around with their friends. That is a form of rough and tumble play with loose parts. Also, sticks in this example was part of the loose part in their play. So they were able to make a sword that was part of their dramatic play and part of their characters. And they were able to engage in that rough and tumble play with each other. So this was a great experience. And I sit back and I watch rough and tumble play happen quite a bit. And I always get the feeling in my stomach that tells me, ooh, I think it's going too far. And that's when I'll step in and I'll say to the children, I'm feeling uncomfortable with what's happening. How are you guys feeling? What's happening for the two of you? And then, we have a conversation about it. So rough and tumble play with loose parts. It's fun, and it's a part of our development.
So another type of play, risky play, is play at great heights. So those include, playing near cliffs. That sounds edges of slopes, and trees are often a big favorite for mastering how to climb a tree. Someone said one time, I don't know who, but how will a child ever learn how to climb a tree if they never get an opportunity? Or how can they climb a tree if they never get an opportunity to try? Boulders and steep slopes. So anything that allows children to experience a great heights. There's something about, with all aspects of risky play, there's an element of the more exposure children have with their bodies in space around great heights, or, we'll talk about other ones like great speed or being enclosed. It gives children a chance to really tune into their bodies in response to the land around them and the materials around them. And so loose parts does offer them to go a bit further. Having a slack line set up, give children lots of opportunity to coordinate balance. Even just uneven terrains. I remember once being out in BC, and there was a beach with large boulders, and someone had come down to the beach, and there was just a toddler in a diaper, and the child was just let to go roam this beach. And I wish I could have, the way that the child maneuvered and found the body. I feel like I could actually see the vestibular balance and the kinesthetic awareness all like being turned on and fired up as this child was navigating an uneven surface. That chance for balancing on a log, in the one photo, there's a child up on the top of a log branch that had fallen, and that's, children will start off doing what feels right for them, the more that their body knows and figures it out, the more they might be inclined to try it more, and so the sense of the feeling of confidence and resilience that comes from that is quite dynamic. What even children will do is, even at great heights, children will explore dangling from something or balancing close to the edge. Children love to jump from high places. So that's just some examples of where you see children play with great heights.
Okay, next in our risky play, we have play with dangerous tools. In my practice as a land-based educator, I have been giving, dangerous, I use in quotation, tools to children as young as 2 years old. When we're learning how to do traditional land-based activities, or even just when we're engaging outside. Of course, there's always developmental appropriate practices involved, and we have our experiential risk assessments, and it's always one-on-one and observed. But children like to engage with dangerous tools, and when they're using tools to manipulate or alter loose parts in their environment, such as logs, sticks, or bushes, children use these tools to express their personality, to engage in social behaviors, to exercise their cognitive thinking. So again, those executive brain functions are in action when they're engaging with these dangerous tools and loose parts. Within my practice, we let children use knives, axes, saws, hammers and nails, hand drills, ropes, but without the loose parts, such as scrap lumber, sticks, tree cookies, the risky play with dangerous tools wouldn't be enriching. If you can put tools out for children, but if there's no material or loose part for them to engage in with the tool, it's really meaningless. So risky play with dangerous tools is a skill-based type of play where children are learning to use something that's functional. And when children use tools and loose parts together, they build their skills with tools, their engineering skills, also their fine motor skills, their communication, and their expression. So it can seem a bit overwhelming at first. Trust me, I've been doing it for 10 years and grew up in the land-based way of life where, in our community, it's just normal practice for young children to be involved in these activities. But the more you do it and have those risk assessments set up, the more fluid it becomes in your practice.
Okay, so another risky type of play is play at high speeds. And children have this interest in seeing how fast they can go, how fast they can run, how fast they can swing. Children, when they're swinging, might even add more challenge to it by adding more children to the swing. And if slides, there's that old adage that children should only go down a slide feet first. But children are exploring going down head first or backwards because their bodies need something more to challenge themselves with. Loose parts also play a role in this as far as developing ramps with planks of wood and tying up rope swings with a piece of a branch and ropes or tire swings. Just a few examples of children playing at high speeds. And children will often, use loose parts to invent their own different types of apparatuses for making things go fast, or making themselves go fast, or swinging fast.
Okay, thanks, Sinead. So next we have hiding. And if you're in Ontario, you know that it's a major incident if, a child hides in a cupboard and can't be found in your head counts, those kinds of things. So we often shy away from allowing children to hide where we can't see them. But it's an important part of play in early childhood that connects to, those executive brain functions. But loose parts play such an integral role in letting children feel like they're hiding or they're lost and away from the adults when really they aren't. And the adults can still observe from a distance, but their little forts or structures that they make with loose parts makes them feel like they're separated from the group. So in this way, loose parts can support risky play as well as quiet play. I know when I had a licensed early years center in my home, we had a really hard time establishing that quiet play place or the quiet place because there's just so many kids and so many adults around. So when we take the learning outside and we provide children with loose parts like boughs, logs, reeds, grasses, they can create their own quiet place for when they need space away from others. But it can also make them feel like they're hidden away or they're lost. And that's one of the important elements of risky play. So I encourage you, if that's kind of, the first step you take in bringing loose parts into your outdoor learning or your ministry regulated play spaces that you have outside, bringing those loose parts in and letting children create their own little hideaways is a great first place to start in using loose parts from nature or bridging, outdoor education within the ministry regulated early years centers and risky play. It's a good first place to start.
And so lastly, children are also, risky play is play near dangerous elements or even with dangerous elements. So someone mentioned in the chat visiting the river's edge all the time. So children, there's something about being near water that just invokes children's interaction with it and interest. Ponds, creeks, shorelines, and children will find ways to engage with it, whether it's throwing rocks. So having those loose parts like rocks and buckets and different types of spoons and ladles for scooping and transporting, making channels for puddles to connect from one puddle to another are part of how children do interact with dangerous elements. And also with fire, with appropriate risk-benefit assessments and conversations with children and exposure over time, children gain a lot of confidence and become quite empowered when they get to actually participate in creating and maintaining fires for programs and its use for providing warmth if it's cold outside, or providing a means to cook if the children are cooking as well, or interested in cooking. And these also, children don't often even get an opportunity to cook in the indoors, let alone an opportunity to cook and prepare meals in the outdoors as well. Oh, I'm seeing that it says it's frozen. Some people in the chat are saying that it's frozen. Can you hear?
Yeah, my chat is really lagged as well. I'm not.
Oh, okay.
Robin and
yeah, hi Kay. That has to do with your, like, whoever it's affecting, it's something at your end. it's your signal. You can see in the top right-hand corner there's a signal indicator with how strong it is. The best I can do is recommend people get as close to their router or their Wi-Fi point as possible. So it's coming through clear for me here, just, as an aside. Yeah, there's nothing. It has to do with your own signal where you're receiving it from. So
Okay.
and to everybody, we will be making this available, and so it's recording fine. And so we will be making this available in case you did have some issues. But yeah, as everybody's saying, you can hit reconnect and refresh your screen if you want as well. Okay, thanks. Back to it.
Thank you. Okay. So that's just a little overview of different types of risky play that children, and it can range from being like really scary to being, simply splashing in a puddle. Okay, I just want to check in with you. We had that breakout experience. Do you want to do that, or do you want to move into the next pieces? I'm just looking at the time and wanting to leave some time for...
I think we can skip over the activity. We could just briefly chat about it and then move into the next part.
Sure. Okay. Sounds good.
So we had a bit of a breakout experience, but we just want to make sure we respect everyone's time. But we wanted everyone to kind of get up and move around again and just kind of look around your house and try and find an open-ended material or loose part that might support risky play or some type of play-based learning. Because we really want educators and ECEs to know that having loose parts, finding things for children to engage and play with is not an expensive undertaking. These can be things we just have around our homes. Things from your recycling bin. I have an old piece of rope that my children will tie around a box or a laundry basket and pull their log dogs around in that they made from logs at Forest and Nature School. Painter's tape, different pieces of styrofoam from the recycling, really anything. It doesn't have to be, you're spending hundreds of dollars on loose parts from the dollar store or something. It can just be things you find around your house. So challenge after this webinar is maybe start making your own little loose parts collection. It gets to be a lot of fun. Unless you're my husband and it drives him crazy that I have loose part baskets all over our house. But yeah, it's a pretty fun, you start to see the value in all of these different materials kind of through the child's perspective. Which brings me to the role of the educator. So in thinking about loose parts, brain development, how do we take children outside? We play a lot of roles as early childhood educators, kindergarten teachers, but our main roles when we're supporting loose part play in the outdoors is to be co-constructors of the play and co-constructors of the meaning. We want to be process oriented. So we don't want to focus on closed-ended outcomes. We really want them as open as possible. We have to prepare the environment with provocations or invitations to different materials. So I often will collect different loose parts, or my neighbor saves her recycling for me and will bring it over. And I will put out different provocations or invitations at Forest and Nature School, maybe on a tarp or in a basket. And I just invite the children to create and build and explore and play with those different materials. And then the number one thing we can do is get out of the way. And that it's almost counterintuitive. We think as ECEs and teachers, we've got to be in there like, making learning happen, but learning happens on its own. And the land as a first teacher also lets learning happen. So getting out of the way, stepping back and doing our observations and our documentation so that we can provide meaningful provocations for the next day is really important. Then we want to hold space and time. Uninterrupted periods of free play is really important with loose parts because it allows children to dive into those long-term projects. We want to embrace the wrong answers. Children are not going to grow up thinking that, you know, the little helicopters that fall from maple trees are actually, you know, fairies that have lost their wings because the seasons have changed. They will grow up to learn what the true meaning of these pieces of nature are. But embrace the imagination, embrace the wrong answer, let children create their own small worlds with loose parts, their own dialogues, their own characters, and their own stories. It's very important for their brain development. We want to support risky play as much as possible, and, you know, be those keen observers. So, you know, that's a lot that we're trying to manage all at once. So if it feels a little overwhelming to you, I encourage you to just pick one piece of that role of the educator and slowly start focusing on that. Because when I first became a forest and nature school teacher, you know, and land-based educator almost 10 years ago, I was not good at all of these things simultaneously. It's taken 10 years of practice to get to a place where I feel confident in my approach as an educator in fostering connections to children with nature and loose parts.
Okay, so a question that often comes up with loose parts is storage. Where do you store stuff? How do you store it? And people have often just used a bin and a shed to store the materials. And like I mentioned before, milk crates have been pretty pivotal in storing materials. I guess depending on where you are, some things to consider are whether or not you share spaces with others and how you navigate that and negotiate that, and cleaning up loose parts too. I think that depends on the programs that you are in, and some people may decide that, you know, having the children responsible for cleaning up is really important for the care, but then some people, and maybe the time allows for that, and then other programs might say, well, the play is the most important, so we'll let the children play, but then they have potentially other extra staffing. I say that with a bit of a smirk because that often doesn't happen in early childhood, but sometimes the play materials can be left out, or some staff can help put things away afterwards. It's a question too about when you're tidying up play, what happens to those pieces that children were involved in. It is a process, and it's something that people should come up with in the context of where they're working, and maintaining materials as well. You know, going through them, checking them piece by piece to see, you know, what gets used a lot, what may need replacing, what aren't getting used, and may not be of value to the play at that particular time. It's all a process. There's a video that identifies how children are involved in the actual storage and placing it, taking it in and out. I think I might leave that just for now for folks to visit on their own. It's Earth Day Canada has done some work on loose parts and shared how this works in a school environment. This particular one is in Ottawa. So I'm just thinking of the time. So what do you think, Kay? Should I play a little bit, or shall we move on to the next? I'll pass on this for now, because I think it'll be nice to explore the full length of it, I think, on your own time.
We'll make sure that the link goes out to Robin, and who's interested in seeing the full clip. We can get that link sent out to you.
Okay, great. So the last two things that we want to share before our Q&A is long-term projects and just some suggestions for loose parts for infants and toddlers.
Okay, so if you look at the screen again, here's another picture of our pirate ship at Boreal Forest School. And the building of this play space has taken place over 5 years. And we've never deconstructed it. We just keep adding to it year after year. Now, how did I support this long-term project? How did, me and my staff support this? Because it's really important how loose parts can support long-term projects. So through our observations and documentations, we were able to, do backwards lesson planning, where we're watching the children and we're deciding what our plan is for the next day based on what we've observed the children are interested in. Then from that backwards lesson plan comes our provocations or our invitations for students. So maybe we bring up more lumber, maybe we get more nails, maybe we bring out the saws, or we get out tarps to make masks for the ship, or we bring out canvas so the children can make their own flags. So those are our various loose parts that we would put out as provocation to support the ongoing creation of this long-term project. So we've had to have effective storage and organization to make sure, our lumber isn't all over the forest and our tools aren't all over the place. We have locked toolboxes, and we have a shelf where we store our lumber that's just between two trees. And we also do a check of this pirate ship every day, where we remove nails that might be sticking out to remove those hazards. And we conduct our experiential and site risk assessments every day to make sure that it's a safe space for the children to continue building on their project. So I'm excited to see how many more years this project will go on. And it's really loose parts and the role of the educator that's been facilitating that long-term project.
And so lastly, I think the biggest concern with infants and toddlers is them putting things into their mouth. But it doesn't mean that infants don't benefit as well from exploring loose parts of different kinds, including, scarves and cloths and leaves in the fall. We have to supervise infants anyway when they're engaged in play, and we're monitoring how they're doing and what they are putting in their mouths. So I think it's okay to allow infants and toddlers to explore loose parts as well. And then some storybooks for related that are inspired by loose parts play. And now a Q&A. So I know we don't have a lot of time, but I did want to bring up a couple of questions that did come up earlier. Kay, while you were speaking to the prefrontal cortex, someone asked, had you said that the prefrontal cortex developed by age 4? Do you know? Or there was 2 questions about the prefrontal cortex, what age that develops at, and how old were the children on the Boreal pirate ship?
Okay, so the prefrontal cortex is developed by age 4, and then based on our experiences we have age 4 on, it refines its functions. So its ability to store memory, solve problems, negotiate pro-social behavior. It just continues to refine itself after age 4. And the children at Boreal Forest School are ages kindergarten age. So 3.8 years old to 6 years old. Full day kindergarten in Ontario. Yeah. I noticed some questions as well about safety. And I would just say that having regular risk assessments, parent meetings as staff members, site risk assessments are all an important part to ensuring safety. But as an ECE, you have to feel comfortable You have to feel safe and empowered in what you're doing with the children in order for them to feel safe and empowered and comfortable. So start somewhere small and build your practice, like scaffold your practice up. Maybe try focusing on one type of risky play or one type of loose part at a time as you continue to grow your professional practice. And that's all the questions I saw, but the chat's really delayed, so I apologize if we're missing any questions. Maybe due to the delay in the chat, if anyone has any burning questions that they're, upset that they're not being answered right now, if you wanted to email those to Robin, she could help to connect us and we could answer those questions for you. So in being respectful of the time, I just wanted to point out some additional resources that we have on our slide here. We can make these additional resources available to all of you. I just wanted to point out in particular the project approach. If you haven't had any experience or you haven't read through the project approach, it is where I went to, learn how to build long-term projects with my children with loose parts out on the land. So that's a great resource. All of these resources are great, and we'll make sure that you get links to those. So Miigwech, Wallawan, thank you. That's it for me. And
thank you so much, guys. That was great. I really appreciate you taking the time to walk us through these loose parts, and we've learned a lot about them. So like I mentioned in the chat, it's Robin. You can forward me any questions and I'll make sure that Sinead and Kay get those questions, and that we will be sending out the resource links plus the certificates by the end of this week. So I appreciate your patience on that. I will have those out by Friday. Anything else you guys want to add, or are we good to go?
Oh, thank you so much. Thanks for everybody for joining. And
well, thank you. Thank you guys for taking the time. We really appreciate it. And thanks for everybody who participated. So have a good evening, everyone, and stay safe and stay healthy.
Thank you.